I see that we have Dr. Kate Cooper joining. Welcome, Doctor. Welcome, welcome. I have known, just to give you a kind of an overview here, or an introduction here, I have known Dr. Cooper for a very, very long time. We were at the same graduate school, and so we graduated semi together. I think we were maybe a year or two apart. I'm not exactly sure, but we were in the same graph theory course. And I remember that it was Kate who always had all the answers, and so I'd always ask her all my questions because I never knew what was going on in that class. And so
You're
I'd say,
so kind.
I'd say, Kate, please tell me how do I solve this? And so she knew all the answers, and so I was very, very I was indebted to knowing her in graduate school. So thank you very much, Kate, for being there. Now, this is our class. Welcome to our class, and we are a bioinformatics course. This is a intro level based course. We just give you an idea about where we've come so far. We've been basically covering the central dogma of biology, and we've just reached the protein level. So we're talking about proteins, and we're going into post-translational modifications, which happens to be one of my favorite areas. That was actually my doctoral work, guys. Anyway, I'll stop blabbering here, but maybe Kate, you could spend some time to introduce yourself and then take it away. Tell us what you like.
Sure. So Oliver, can you tell me how much time you want me to talk for? I can talk for 5 hours, as you know. I see there's about 30, is 30 minutes, 45 minutes, or is that too long?
That's fine. Whatever time you want. We actually go here until about, what is it? I think it's 4:50 or something. Or
Oh, okay. Well, I won't talk that long, but
yes,
okay.
we've got like over an hour here, and so whatever time you want is fine. It's fine.
Perfect. Okay. Do you mind if I share my screen?
Oh yes, yes. I have to enable that. There you are. Sorry about that. Yes.
Okay.
For somehow that option always is on. I can't take it off. So, but you should be able to share now.
Sounds good. Okay. So hi everybody. Thank you for having me. Let me get my I always try to do two things at once. So I just came from my other course. So thank you for allowing me to be a couple minutes late. I really appreciate that. My name is Kate Cooper. I do have an intro slide here. Oliver, Dr. Bonham-Carter and I go way back. But let me give you the formal talk for me. So I got my bachelor's in bioinformatics in 2007 from UNO. I was a person who was always interested in computers and was always the fixer of the computers at home. And I was also interested in going to med school. And then I went to a couple talks about med school and figured it probably wasn't for me. So I got drawn to the undergraduate bioinformatics program at UNO. It actually was created in 2005. So I didn't really have I wasn't officially part of the major till it was created. And I think me and Dr. Bonham-Carter and then there's some other peers from that time who were the first people out of the entire program at UNO. We have a master's, PhD, and a bachelor's in bioinformatics here. So I will, my agenda for you all is a little bit, I've got 4 kind of different sections here. I want to tell you a little bit about what bioinformatics at UNO looks like. I've already kind of talked about my path, but I'll elaborate a little bit more. I've got a couple slides on my research. I will try that have a lot of content on them, but I'll try to talk at a high level understanding that you're talking about central dogma that I just think is really compelling, interesting stuff. And then I will also mention careers. But please feel free to stop me at any time or interject. I am Zoom proficient, so I understand you can put comments in the chat or unmute or whatever you wish as well. So I think probably you've talked about this to some extent. I did take a look at the course syllabus online and kind of the other stuff as well. It's just a cool, impressive course. So some of this may be redundant, but just try to do a level set for everyone. The question is, what is bioinformatics? And it's really hard to define this. There's kind of an argument about what is bioinformatics, and because it's a broad field. And that's a little bit of a dichotomy because people say, oh, it's so niche. Like you have an undergraduate degree in bioinformatics. That's really specialized for an undergraduate degree, which it is. However, bioinformatics is a huge field. So we want to train students early to be able to go and be excellent in the domain. So I borrowed this from fiosgenomics.com because I think it's relevant. Really, bioinformatics occurs at the interface of statistics, biology, and computer science, but it also has, I've got a smattering of other terms here. So I have used calculus. You know, when you take the calculus course, everyone says, well, I'm never going to use this. Teach me how to do my taxes. Well, I actually do use calculus in my work. Evolutionary biology, database development and management. So programming a database, data governance. I do have a couple slides on policy and making and that sort of thing. That's becoming more and more relevant in our field. Data management, physics, chaos theory. There's the policy. High performance computing. This is becoming, I mentioned this one because we recently interviewed, I was on a committee to hire a new faculty member in a different department, and they're a wet lab researcher at the bench, right? So they use the pipettes and do ELISAs and all that sort of thing. And they were all talking about, well, I need a high performance computing system or environment to be able to do some of my research. So we need people who are trained in not only computer science, but also how to do computer science with the big guns, right? With the big machines. Data science, wet lab research, web development, science communication. This has been so important. I don't know if anyone's on the academic Twitter, but this has been so important the past year with the COVID-19 pandemic. So bioinformatics is a huge field, and you can really do a lot of stuff within it. You can't do everything, I guess, is what I want to say with this slide. We are one of the only, UNO is one of the only universities that actually offer bioinformatics at the undergraduate level. Most of them offer a bioinformatics degree at the graduate level. So all of the UC schools, that UCSD and UC Berkeley, I believe, have bioinformatics or computational biology graduate degrees. So I also have resources at the end of the talk. If you're interested in knowing more about who offers these things, I think Johns Hopkins has one as well. But the reason for that is because it is such a broad field, but it requires super specialized knowledge because of this multidisciplinary approach. So when you do not have access to an undergraduate degree in bioinformatics, what is typically recommended is that you get a foundation in computer science and then specialize in your graduate work. So that's the path that a lot of people take if you don't have an undergraduate bioinformatics degree available. But we do. So I am in the College of Information Science and Technology. This won't mean anything to y'all because you're not in Omaha, but it's housed within PKI, which is where Oliver and I worked together in the lab. And I've got just like a little schematic here showing you, we share the building with the College of Engineering. So it's a very engineering design building. It's a cool building. Maybe I can do a virtual tour for the class someday. So we have 3 academic units, which really doesn't matter to you all other than to tell you the hierarchy or the way that the college is structured. So we have a computer science department, an ISQA department, and then we have the School of Interdisciplinary Informatics, which contains our bioinformatics degree, our cybersecurity degrees, our IT innovation degree, which is a totally unique program. And then we also have PhD programs as well. So these are the ones that are relevant to our talk here today. Our BS in bioinformatics. We also have a master's and a PhD in biomedical informatics that allows you, forces you really to pick a path either in bioinformatics or in health informatics. And we recently hired a new faculty member. I'll introduce her in a moment, a picture of her in a moment, to lead our health informatics program, which is another exponentially rising field. So graduate studies in biomedical informatics, our curriculum. So I'm the lead of our undergraduate curriculum committee. And we also have leads on the, graduate curriculum committee, but it's modeled off of what everyone else is doing throughout the country. So our curriculum and our mission is to prepare students to problem solve in the biomedical informatics space. So we want everyone to have that interdisciplinary knowledge when they walk out the door. We need to be able to analyze, design, weigh in on experiments. When we used to, I think earlier on in bioinformatics, this is not as much of a problem as it used to be, but we would, in the scientific process, people would get their data and then they would do some analysis on it. And then they would, want to do like some advanced computational informatics on it. And that's where they would bring us in. And we were like, you should have brought us in at this level because you don't have enough technical replicates to achieve statistical significance, or I can't make a network out of one sample, that sort of thing. So we want the bioinformatician to not be in a support role necessarily, in a team role. So as a collaborator, not as a service person, which is sometimes how they used to be perceived, but that's not the case anymore. In fact, a lot of our faculty who are in our biology department, for example, actually do bioinformatics. It's a huge part of their research. So we've got, these are the other deliverables of our program here, essentially. But again, we offer the MS and PhD in biomedical informatics, and we've got a great team to do that. So these are probably familiar faces for Dr. Bonham-Carter, and we've been around for a long time. So we've got the dean, who is actually stepping down at the end of the year. He's going to rejoin the faculty, let someone else do the admin work. We've got our associate dean. So our dean is Dr. Ali. Our associate dean is Deepak Kazanchi. We've got Dr. Bastola, Dr. Fruling, Dr. Martina Clark is our newest hire, and she is leading our health informatics programs. Dr. Gersey, who works on cancer informatics and immunoinformatics, if I can say it that way. He does some really cool stuff. And we also have Mr. Ishwar Thapa, who is one of our software developers and also a PhD student in our program. He's a part-time PhD student. So you have seen this slide already. What I want to tell you about this is that, so I got my undergraduate degree in bioinformatics. I skipped over a master's. I did not complete a master's. Not everyone knows that you can do that, but I didn't do a master's. And when I tell people I didn't do a master's, they're like, oh, I didn't know you could do that. And then I graduated in 2013, got a postdoc at UNO, came back to UNO, and then I received a assistant professor position. My responsibilities here are research, teaching, and service, as they typically are in academia. I teach 2 classes in the fall and 2 classes in the spring, and the rest of the time I do research and service. So my path to bioinformatics was spurred through interest in genetics from a really early age. So I think this is the case for a lot of people who are interested in science. I had a grandmother, my maternal grandmother was diagnosed with breast cancer, and then my mom was diagnosed with breast cancer. And all this talk about, oh, it's genetic and it passes through, it's hereditary, came, into my house. And I was 8 at the time, and I became really interested in genetics and say, well, how is that possible? And then my mom actually got tested for the BRCA1, BRCA2 mutate, or BRCA1, BRCA2 mutations that you're probably familiar with breast cancer. And she didn't have them. And I was like, what's that about? I thought that it was hereditary. And then the discussion became, well, it's a combination of factors. It's behavioral, and it's genetic, and it's environmental, and it's complex, right? So that was a really, really interesting concept for me. Once I got to, and I said I wanted to go to med school. Once I got to the undergraduate level, I was looking at degree programs, and I saw this bioinformatics program that was being developed. And I said, well, I'd love to do this, but I've never programmed before in my life. And I'm very intimidated by it. And they said, well, we will teach you. That's what we do here. So they taught me, and I fell in love with programming. In my sophomore year of after my sophomore year, I was a rising junior. I received an internship that would allow me to do undergraduate research. And then also, if I stuck with the program, would fund my first year of graduate school, which of course led me to graduate school, and I fell in love with research. So any questions at this time on my path or bioinformatics at UNO? I'll wrap it up again a little bit later, but any questions? I'll give it an awkwardly long amount of time just in case anyone needs to unmute.
You mentioned chaos theory as a component of bioinformatics. Can you briefly explain what that is and how it relates to bioinformatics?
Yes, I love that you saw that. So we always, whenever I do a lot of outreach with K through 12 students, and we talk about Jurassic Park a lot. I don't know if anyone's seen Jurassic Park, but Jeff Goldblum plays a chaos theorist in Jurassic Park. And that comes into play in systems biology, especially when we are modeling. So to give the high level overview of systems biology, we're taking a cell, we're taking a tissue, and we were trying to understand everything that's going on, right? When Gregor Mendel did his pea plant experiments and figured out, a Punnett square, here's big B, little b, that sort of thing. It was studying one gene at a time or a couple genes at a time. When we look at the entire system, we really need to understand, are the processes that we're identifying, are they random or are they not random? And we understand that statistically through chaos theory. So you have to have I don't have a very depth of knowledge in chaos theory to say that, but it's definitely involved in understanding my complex system. Is it random or is it self-organizing or is it self-healing? And some of those theoretical concepts come up. In bioinformatics, you don't have to touch everything. So you could be a bioinformatician and just program and never ever touch the theoretical foundations, or you could go full bore into algorithm development and design and trying to understand, from a mathematical perspective, prove different things. So there's really a breadth of things you can go into there. I hope that answers your question, Kylie.
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
Thank you. I see another question. Does UNO have any neuroinformatics programs by chance? No, we don't. I do have a student, though, who is entering our master's program who is interested in that exact topic. And we do have collaborators at UNMC, the medical center, which is just down the street. So the big difference between UNO and UNMC is a medical center, and they have faculty who see patients and are involved in clinical research and that sort of thing. We do work with them from a collaborative perspective. I do data management kind of support for people at the med center. So you want to have a wearable device that tracks EKG. I'm going to set up the system that says, okay, I'm going to pull the data off the wearable device and store it on a high performance computing system and make sure it's redundantly backed up. So we don't have a specific neuroinformatics program here, although you could do a biomedical informatics program and then specialize in neuroinformatics. Our UNMC program is a sister program, so you can get this degree, the MS in biomedical informatics or PhD in biomedical informatics. You can get that degree at the Med Center as well. It's the same program. This is confusing. It's the same program because the degrees all come from the University of Nebraska, not from Omaha or UNMC. So you could do it that way as well and identify faculty at UNMC who are neurologists and then have a bioinformatics faculty to be a co-I or something. So we don't have a specific neuroinformatics program, but you could identify faculty to maybe work with. I hope that answers your question, Anthony. Thank you. All right. So I do want to just talk a little bit about cool bioinformatics research that is in my domain. I am specifically, I've done a lot of things over the years. I was doing undergraduate research in pattern finding, and then we worked on network analysis. My doctoral research was on basically applying graph theory and network science to biomedical data and doing exploratory analysis, really at the time when that field was exploding. Everyone uses networks now. I'll show you some examples of that. And since then, one of the challenges, to give you an insight into what it's like to be a bioinformatics faculty at a non-medical center, it's really hard for us to get access to patient data unless we have a collaborator at UNMC who's willing to engage us in their project. So if we want to lead our own projects, we either have to purchase patient data or really have a good relationship with a faculty member at the med center, or go work at the med center. So one of the things that we do is we use publicly available data in our analyses. We use, and to the extent that is available is wonderful. But my research in the past years, I've gotten into consumer health and how can we actually prevent disease, because that information is more readily available. Think about how willing you are to share your personal health record information versus how willing you are to share your, if you use MyFitnessPal or something like that, what you eat every day, right? You might have, if you have MyFitnessPal or any of the other apps that are out there, you might be willing to be friends with someone that you're actually friends with in real life and share what you eat, then it's almost like a competition or something. Research has found that people are willing to share that data more readily than their personal health information. So in this consumer space, or the who you are before you become a patient space, we can do some really cool stuff. My specific interest is in how the diet affects your microbiome and how your microbiome helps you modulate disease in the body. So what we know, the microbiome is essentially the collection of bacteria that live in your gut. I'm talking about the gut microbiome. There's many microbiomes. I'll say it that way. So the gut microbiome is the collection of microbes. This can include like viruses as well that live in your gut. And there's been a lot of research that has found that your diet affects your microbiome, and your microbiome affects the host metabolism, so your metabolism. And we know that metabolism has a huge role in the development of disease like cancer, that sort of thing. Not always cancer, but lots of different things. So obesity, this one is a melanoma related one. Just the microbiome has a lot of hands and a lot of stuff in the body. Okay. But it's really hard to characterize the microbiome. There was a project funded by the National Institutes of Health in 2008 called the Human Microbiome Project, which sought to kind of characterize the microbiome. It was new as of 2000, like relatively new as of 2008. So one of the things that we have found from this early research in the microbiome is that only 10 to 20% of the types of bacteria, I'm talking at the genus level, found in our guts are found everywhere. So that means that if I were to take a gut microbiome sample from, 10 people and then compare them, only 10 to 20% of the species or the genus level of those bacteria would be shared. So it's not like you can come up with a profile of a healthy microbiome and here's an unhealthy microbiome. It's not that easy because there's so many of them. Okay. This is like a nice overview image of what that looks like. And a lot of people are working in the microbiome right now because it's a really hot area, but we're also finding a lot of associations with outcomes. It affects mental health outcomes. It affects long-term disease. It affects people with food allergies and people who are nursing mothers who are trying to make sure that their kids don't have colic. I mean, it really touches everything is what we're finding. So this is a nice overview. Within the gut lives microbes, and they express their own genes and proteins. So within your body, right, we have our own genes, our own DNA, but the microbes that live in your gut also do that as well. So they're constantly expressing genes and proteins. Those in turn affect the metabolites within our body, and then let's come back and re-influence our microbes. Okay. We do know some things. There's I think it's Culturelle. Like if you take Culturelle, it's a probiotic. They know that if you take that probiotic, it will temporarily affect your gut microbiome and help promote this Akkermansia bacteria that it wants you to, that you're actually taking. But as soon as you stop taking it, it doesn't colonize your bacteria, your gut, for example. So again, we're still finding out a lot of things about how to influence our microbiome. And there's some really cool studies out about that. This one is recent. If you go to clinicaltrials.gov, which is the National Institutes of Health's like official register of clinical trials, you'll see the search for PREDICT, you'll find the PREDICT 1, PREDICT 2, and PREDICT 3 study. This is a study that has looked at about 1,000 people in the UK and about 100 people in the United States. The United States is its validation cohort. And what they're doing there is to actually try and identify what is the relationship between diet and microbiome, because microbiome is so important. And to not get too high level on you, or to not to get too deep for you, this is a recent paper. I think this is 2021. This is this year. This is a Nature Medicine paper that they found. Read at your own risk. It's like a 40-page paper, but they wanted to look at the associations in the human microbiome, gut microbiome, with metabolism in human hosts from 1,000 people. And this was done from the participants in the PREDICT 1 study. Okay. This is the author list. We've got people from University of Turin, Trento, King's College, University of Nottingham, really just all over the place. Really cool talk. And some of the people on this paper, Tim Spector, Sarah Berry, and Nicola Sagata, at least, probably more, but these are the ones I knew, are on Twitter and talking about the research in day-to-day interactions. So that's a place where you can, if you're like, oh, I'm really interested in this kind of research, but I don't know, like, what the field is like, this is a space where you can actually get a feel for, oh, the people working on this are just like you and me. And they've got, they talk about our grant didn't get funded or our paper didn't get accepted, that sort of thing. So it's a little bit of a cool, humbling experience there. But what they did in this study is they, like I said, they've got 1,000 individuals in a UK cohort, 100 individuals in a US cohort that would act as validation. So any findings that they have in the UK cohort, they would try to validate if it's also true in the US cohort, to make sure that it's not biased by location or some sort of approach that they did. They collect stool samples from each of the participants, and then they run metagenomic sequencing on it to identify what bacteria, what microbes are in the gut microbiome. They call them OTUs, or operational taxonomic units. And then they also collected metadata. So what's your age? What's your BMI? What's your waist to hip ratio? What's your visceral fat? What is your diet? They did a diet recall or diet index on these individuals. I don't have it here, but what they essentially do is they give them a paper and they say, how often do you eat X food? One is eggs, and one is dairy, like milk and butter and yogurt, and then one is beef. So it's not very specific, right? We're not harnessing all the information we have on our phones, which you'll probably see where this is going. So they do a dietary recall in that way. And then they also collect blood after fasting and then after a meal. So fasting blood, if you've ever had to do that, where you go into the doctor's office and they say, you have to give blood, but you can't eat for 12 hours before, and you're really frustrated because you're hungry. So that's your fasting blood. And then your postprandial blood is like after a meal. So what is your blood glucose after you've eaten within 30 minutes or something? So they did this for all of these individuals that they recruited from the Predict 1 cohort, and they found lots of cool stuff. I want to start off with the bioinformatics results, especially from a reproducibility and documentation perspective. So when Dr. Bonham-Carter and I were doing our graduate work, I think he might agree with me that lots of tools that we used were not well documented. Not a lot of support. Okay. So now in the bioinformatics community, there's huge like forums for support of how do I get this? There's a GitHub repository. So I'm having an error with your code, Kate Cooper. Can you help? Is this a bug or am I using it wrong? That wasn't really as prevalent back in the day. So I have a deep appreciation for people who aim to make a bioinformatics tool or a software and then try to make it documented and usable by accessible by whoever wants to use it. And one of the contributions from this study that they had is that they said all of the data that we used is publicly available. Well, all of the microbiome data that they used is publicly available. You can go download it yourself. If you want our metadata, you have to be able to store it in I'll say HIPAA compliant, but it's the UK, whatever the UK version of HIPAA is, in a HIPAA compliant way. So that information is not used against those people if it could be. And you need to apply for application, that sort of thing. And then they did a really good job of listing out their methods. So what tools did you use in what parameters? I mean, all of that was very reproducible, which we're aiming for that. That would be considered excellent in the bioinformatics space. A lot of times when people do a bioinformatics analysis, they say in the method section, oh, this was analyzed with homebrew scripts. So they wrote it on their own, but they don't show you what those scripts are. So there's really no way to reproduce what they did, which kind of goes against the whole, energy, I guess, of science, or the whole, excitement of it. So we want to be able to reproduce what you did, because if you did something cool, I want to see how you did it so I can apply it to my research and replicate it. Right. So that was one contribution of this work. There was another, and this is what a lot of groups are doing when they have the resources to do it. I don't want to, if you look at this author list here, where did it go? If you look at this author list here and you go, oh God, I'm never going to have, my research group at UNO is a fraction of this. We've got, 4 faculty really who work in bioinformatics, and then, a couple more who work in health informatics. For us to be able to pull something like this off without access to patients, it would be very challenging. So this is like top tier, like you've got all the resources that you need and you've got a really big team, right? My group would not necessarily be able to do something like this without partnering with someone else. So this is what we aspire to, this kind of research. And this is why it's so exciting to see these talks come out. So what they found here, this is correlation, meaning relationship, with alpha diversity and all of the factors you see here on the left. So what we see here is that there's a negative correlation, a negative association with alpha diversity of your microbiome and weight. Okay, so the way to interpret that is higher diversity, higher number of bacterial species in your gut microbiome is better because you have a microbiome that can flex and adapt and be, adapt to whatever you choose to throw at it through your diet or otherwise. And so they find that if you have a higher number of microbial species, your weight is lower. Okay. And if you have a less diverse microbiome, your weight tends to be higher. Same thing with BMI and visceral fat, right? So in general, the message is the more diverse your microbiome, the lower weight you are. And that's some of the things that they report in this study. This is also linked to, I'm off the Predict One study now. This is also linked to within bioinformatics, we also talk about biomedical informatics, and that comes with subfields. So nutrition informatics, consumer health informatics, nutrigenomics, which I'll show you about in a moment. And these are areas that I'm also involved in as well. And it impacts the gut microbiome because we ultimately want to know, if I go back to this slide, how does our diet, something that you do every day, unless you do intermittent fasting or something, most people eat, 3 meals a day with some snacks in between. You do that every day. How does that impact your gut microbiome and how does that impact your health over time, right? So nutrition informatics plays a role in this because it allows us to quantify what are we eating, right? This is important for us as individuals managing our day-to-day behavior, our day-to-day nutrition, but it's also important for individuals who are managing people who are in care, right? So people who are in a hospital long-term, people who are in long-term like nursing care, people who need, nutrition through an ID tube. Their nutrition also needs to be managed as well. So nutrition informatics is really being led right now by registered dietitians and anyone who works in that space. And it's another branch of bioinformatics that's up and coming. This is from a recent paper. I meant to share the paper link down here, but if you want to see any of these slides, I'd be happy to send them to you. But there's a lot of overlap here with nutrition informatics and a lot of other stuff. So there's supply chain, right? I actually have a family member who works in supply chain, and I've brought up some of the concepts here with nutrition informatics. And they go, yeah, that's a big problem. We don't know the provenance of XYZ or something. And we could use a technical solution to do it, but we don't have anyone who's trained. So this is a trend that you'll see over and over, I think, in my talk. To give you an idea of where this falls. So nutrition informatics really overlaps with consumer health informatics, which is different because it asks, how are we educating consumers on how to eat? I don't know if you've been affected by the subtle messaging lately, but there's been a big push, I think, from the FDA to say everyone needs to eat more fruits and vegetables, right? There's a lot of encouragement for people to be eating more fruits and vegetables because that's one way that you can really get big impact out of improving your nutrition. We need nutrient profile information systems research. So we need ways to understand what is Dr. Bastola in our lab is working on this as well. What is the link between this nutrient and its effect on the body? So Dr. Bastola in our lab is working on Herb Microbe DB, which looks at the way that natural herbs that people consume and use for flavoring their own food, like basil, how that can affect the human body, and specifically from a metabolic perspective. This definitely overlays with microbiome research because, as I mentioned, that Predict One study, they just used a dietary recall to understand what people are eating habitually. But what do we know about people? One, they lie. Two, they don't remember things accurately. Like, I remember that I eat very healthy, but if I went back and looked at my food logs, I probably don't eat as healthy as I want to think I do. Right. So that definitely overlays with microbiome research. How can we capture diet information and then better correlate it to what's happening in our microbiome? There's a cool field. I'm going to show you a slide on the next one called computational gastronomy that I love it because it involves networks. And why don't I just show it to you? So this comes from it's a editorial note. I don't think it's actually peer reviewed, but this author made a network out of ingredients and how they're used in recipes. It's very cool. And then they went, so you can see here that the colors of so each node represents a food. Here's a little graph theory for you. Each node represents a food or a nutrient, and each edge represents those nutrients are linked through a common food type or flavor or something like this. And the argument for computational gastronomy is that we can better understand anthropological perspectives from a food perspective. So you can analyze recipes and say, what are the underlying trends of this particular type of food? And how does that play into the social aspect of it? How can we help influence chefs and people who want to know more about culture? I mean, so it really has cool overlays with a lot of different fields. So I'm a little bit down the rabbit hole here, but we're going to go back to the bioinformatics, I promise. There is a huge need for people who are trained, and I will repeat this later, people who are trained in biomedical informatics to help us computerize interventions that help us improve our health. That's the whole goal of the National Institutes of Health, help people live longer, healthier, happier lives, right? We want to live a long life, but we also want that life to be healthy. And that's the goal. To the point about chaos theory, I do have my slide on chaos theory in here. When we talk about these networks here, that was the goal of my doctoral research. So I just wanted to briefly mention it here. The reason why we like and use network models is because it can be used to represent any system. We need to be careful. I say that with caution, but it can represent a social network, as we know, not like Facebook, although you could probably represent Facebook as a network, but we can look at how social networks evolve over time. We can look how the brain has a network. So you probably have heard of neural networks. It's not the same kind of network, but it's got a similar backstory. How tissues are organized can be laid out as a network. So all of this goes back to graph theory as well. But the point is that we can look at a system, any system, especially when we're talking about systems biology, as a sum of its components, right? As its building blocks. So when we talk about networks and systems biology, we are trying to take a whole level approach to understanding that organism, that tissue, that cell, whatever's happening, whatever we're looking at. We want to look at everything at once and see what's going on. What are the patterns that are happening? And it is systems biology is considered to be part of the larger complex systems theory, which is where that chaos theory comes in, is in the nonlinear dynamics aspect of it. Okay, so if you want to dive into, again, you could just search for complex systems on Google and find this image. That's where I got it. But that's where a lot of this stuff comes in. And this is where the theory comes into play, because if I'm going to make a claim about a system, I need to be able to back it up with statistics. A lot of times what we find, the patterns that we find are small enough that they need to be validated. It's not just clear. We need to validate them with statistics. And that's where this all comes from, is how do we know that it's not random and that it is self-organizing in some way? There's lots of different, so just to bring it back to bioinformatics for you, I guess biomedical informatics, I don't just have bioinformatics examples here. You can make network out of anything. Again, we need to be careful. We need to make sure that we have a control for it and, do the whole science thing, but that would come into play in a graduate degree where you learn how to do that. We can take proteins. So y'all are familiar with the central dogma now. Once two proteins are made, they can physically interact with one another. And we can measure for an entire cell or an entire system, we can measure what protein interactions are happening. And the interesting thing about a protein-protein interaction network, if you draw the network where each node is a protein and each node is connected by, if it physically interacts with each other, if it's connected, you draw an edge between it. And the structure of that resulting network actually tends to be a distribution that follows the Pareto principle. We know that there are hub proteins, so proteins that do a lot of jobs, and then there are non-hub proteins that only do one job, and they really take on a structure that's very similar to a social network, right? Which is what we would. If you think about your social network, you probably have someone in your social network who's like the mover and the shaker and is always out and about and shaking hands and hey, everybody. And then you probably have people who like to prefer to stay home and interact with two people a week. Right. So, of course, during COVID times, it's a little bit thrown off from normal, but what we see is that social networks and protein interaction networks, their underlying structure are very similar. There are differences. If we go into the graph theory of it, there are differences in protein interaction networks and social networks. For example, hub proteins in social networks tend to be connected. It's beneficial for two people who are the movers and shakers of a community to be connected. In a protein interaction network, they tend to not be connected. And that's something that we had an undergraduate researcher validate in a summer project once. So really cool applications of systems biology with network science within, that's really a big subfield of bioinformatics. I would be remiss if I didn't talk about gene expression networks. So if you take, if we have an RNA sequencing experiment, or to use an older term, a microarray experiment, we can look at co-expression through correlation. So if to use this example here, if gene 10 and gene 3 have a similar expression pattern, we can draw an edge between them, or we can draw a line and find that there's a linear relationship between them, or it can be nonlinear, I guess. Then we can draw an edge between them and come up with a network of gene co-expression. If you think about it, we can actually pull out patterns within our gene co-expression. So if I've got 3 genes here, and this is gene A, and this is gene B, and this is gene C, and I know that A and B are correlated in expression, and I know that A and C are correlated in expression, it follows logically that B and C should be correlated in expression. So if they're not, I can say that something's going on here. But if they are, I could say, well, this is probably a set of genes that are regulated by some sort of common transcription factor. They're all turned on and turned off, or turned up or turned down by the same transcription factor. So we can make a network out of gene co-expression data. From that information, what people like to do is pull out clusters of genes that are well correlated with one another, more correlated with each other than they are with the rest of their community. And then they determine what is the function of 3 of these genes, right? And if it's all of these are involved in negative transcription of DNA, then I can predict that these 2 genes are also probably involved in negative transcription with DNA. So there's a lot of nuance here that I am just blowing over. So, if someone who did, there's a couple leaders in this field. I've done a lot of research in this, but you'd probably be cringing in your seat if you were in this field. But there's a lot of nuance involved in it. But that's the general gist of what we do with that. To wrap up the bioinformatics research component. So there's a lot of I have not even touched on cancer research. I've not even touched on biomedical research from a health informatics perspective. So all of this, do I have the genomic surveillance here? I do. I'll show you that in just a moment. Yes, I will. There's a lot of cool things that are up and coming with nutrition. For example, there's things that we still don't understand that we want to know. For example, if you do not live in the United States and then you move to the United States, and we know that your gut microbiome gets unhealthier after you come here, unfortunately. We know that the microbiome plays a huge role in cancer, and people are currently teasing out the mechanisms by which that happens. We know that you can change your microbiome over just a couple of days. So these are people who ate the same diet. They had a wash-in period. They ate the same diet, and then they had one group eat a plant-based diet. It's a small sample. It's only 10 samples per arm. One group ate an animal-based diet, and they saw within 2 days that microbiomes were totally different. They changed after 2 days. And then they had a washout period where everyone's microbiomes returned to normal. So we know that your microbiome can change quickly, but we don't know how long you need to eat like this to have it be permanently changed. We still don't have, here I have a box around this. We don't have an accepted quantitative definition of a normal microbiome. So if someone tells you that, oh, your microbiome is, off or whatever, we do have some insights on this bacteria is generally a bad indicator and this bacteria is generally a good indicator, that sort of thing. But we have no way to say, oh, your microbiome is healthy. We have access to a lot of communities that are doing research on this. FENCI is the big one for microbiome and diet research this is the group where the annual conference and expo where dietitians go to get their continuing education credits. I went last year, super cool. talk, but often it's not one of the big research ones, which I'll talk about in a moment. So it was attended by a lot more people who are in clinical practice than researchers, but I think that will grow. But here's a sample of some of the talks that were there last year. There was one talk on gut microbiome and cancer therapy. So once you are in treatment for cancer, how your diet can impact your outcomes, if at all, or how we're trying to understand that. The role of the gut microbiome in cardiovascular disease. This was the talk on the Predict One study with Sarah Berry, Tim Spector. That was that talk I showed you before. We also have there was a, do I have it here? I don't have it here. The National Institutes of Health has come up with a plan for 2020 to 2030 on improving nutrition in the United States. And they want to do that through precision nutrition. That may sound familiar as precision medicine, which is trying to understand each person's genetic predisposition to better treat whatever disease you have. They're also trying to use this to say, hey, the way that you eat has an impact on your health, and we want people to eat the best for who you are individually. So precision nutrition considers a ton of stuff, a ton of factors, like how physically active you are, your sleep, your socioeconomic status has a huge impact on your ability to understand what you're eating. We know that. What are your dietary habits, that sort of thing. They're studying intermittent fasting. They're studying the keto diet for the XYZ treatment, that sort of thing. So this is a huge push right now and will be a push for the next 10 years at least, that was spurred by the National Institutes of Health. The final kind of cool area of research I want to talk about, this is like up and coming. This is like bleeding edge stuff. So nutrigenomics they're trying to understand how your genomics and your diet and your health play with one another. So this is really new stuff, but what they're trying to understand is, for example, if you have a variant in your own DNA that makes you, or do you have a variant in your own DNA that impacts your health versus someone next to you, right? So one of the early ones that came out was we've identified a variant that makes people more or less sensitive to caffeine, right? If you have a 23andMe, you can go figure out if you have that variant or not. But that's where that is going. It's called nutrigenomics, and it is trying to understand how your genomics play a role in your nutrition. So really cool area. Any questions from the research perspective? I'm going to talk next about careers in bioinformatics, but I did want to stop.
Can I ask something there? So when you're talking about like the health and unhealth of the gut, what are some of the consequences of unhealth? Is that necessarily some kind of bowel cancer, or is that like indigestion, or are we talking about
Great
ulcer?
question. So yes, that's the thought, is that we know that the presence of certain bacterial species like Helicobacter pylori, that is a strong risk predictor of colorectal cancer. But the thought is that if we know, for example, where I've seen it studied most, like it's still really new, where I've seen it studied most is for cancer treatment. They have looked at people when they're starting their cancer treatment, and then they can quantify people into responders to treatment versus non-responders to treatment based on their gut microbiome. So it would be useful to say at the start of a treatment, let's take a sample of your microbiome and see whether or not you are grouping with the people who will respond to this treatment or the people who will not. And if you're not going to respond to this treatment, we predict that you're not going to respond to the treatment based on your gut microbiome, then we're not going to put you on this drug because it's going to waste time, right? So that's one thing. So I think the end goal is to say, hey, your DNA and your microbiome right now has you predisposed for XYZ conditions. Let's try to change your diet, not in a big way, but in an iterative way, by giving you more access to education. It's not like go on a diet necessarily. I don't think that's the right approach. I don't think that's where we're headed. I think they're going to say, we're going to educate you on how to eat so that you are less predisposed to develop these diseases. Does that answer your question? Cool.
Perfectly. Thank you.
Great. Other questions? I covered a lot of distance there. So thanks for your patience with that. All right, let's get to the fun stuff. Career in bioinformatics. So we are in need of bioinformaticians. in all these places. This is actually taken from something I share with my students in a class. So we need scientists with diverse viewpoints who know how to perform reproducible science. And that has to be done at this point with computer science. You can't do it with the lab notebooks anymore, unfortunately. This is backed up by, federal it's not just me saying this. I'm echoing what other people have said before me. So we need people who are trained in data science, computer science, informatics to be able to facilitate the new stuff that's coming on the horizon. That has been blatantly obvious for years. And so the NIH, for example, has released a bunch of different, we need to train people, get people into the science pipeline. So we do that. We've got a curriculum advisory group that allows us to work with industry members and academia members and medical center members to say, hey, this is what you need to be training them on. I on Twitter the other week, I saw like it was bioinformatics in the 90s is do a blast search. I don't know if you've done a blast search yet. Bioinformatics in the 2020s is now you got to reanalyze the entirety of a database using a Netflix level, computing system or something. So it has really evolved over the years, to borrow a term from biology. But we are in desperate need in the life sciences of bioinformatics workforce, and it's a really intimidating field. I think it's a really intimidating field to go into because you got to know so much stuff. There are careers in academia. To point you to some resources, I'm not going to anything you can imagine could be done in academia. We have graduates who have gone on to be professors, like Dr. Bonham-Carter and myself. We've got graduates of our programs that have gone on to be program managers, gone on to be software engineers, to be physicians, to be physical therapists. I mean, the whole thing. We have no one in our program who graduated who is not gainfully employed in something they enjoy. Trust me, I try. So sometimes I get job, and I think this is the whole field. The field as itself, not just UNO. I've had people come to me and say, I need someone who's trained to do this. And I email my network and I say, hey, I know everyone has a job, but is anyone looking to move? And everyone's like, nope, which is a good problem for us to have, but bad for the people who need workers, right? So some professional societies, if you are interested in computational biology or bioinformatics, they're not synonymous, but they're very similar. ISCB is going to be your resource for the professional So they have jobs. They have got what schools offer programs. Our program is on there. They have conferences that you can attend, and all of their conferences are top notch. If you're interested in bioinformatics from a clinical perspective, AMIA will be your target resource because that is the American Medical Informatics Association. Every year, both of these groups have meetings every year, multiple meetings, but their annual meetings are where the people go to talk about the science. So this is mostly physicians and people who are involved in clinical research. This is more for the genomics, bioinformatics type group. There's also the American Health Information Management Association. So if you're interested more in health data versus, I don't want to understand the genomics of it. Like I understand what a genome is, but I want to understand how a hospital organizes their health information or how insurance understands health information. That's a HEMA. Okay. And then finally, we have, I threw this in there because it's an accrediting body. A lot of people ask me, is there a license or something I can do to become a bioinformatician? No, as a bioinformatician, your one of your best licenses you can bring to a job is your GitHub repository. So you can search for that. There's a lot of resources out there say, do I need a GitHub repository as a bioinformatician? And the answer is yes, you do, very much. That will help you a lot. But there is licensure available and accreditation available for the health informatics aspect of it. And that is done through CAHIM. All right. Just a quick blurb on careers in industry and nonprofits. So you can go, these are just two examples. You can go into pharmaceutical research, of course. You can go into genomic surveillance. If you haven't been to nextstrain.org lately, they do bioinformatics and they do a genomic surveillance bioinformatics program there. So they've been a sentinel in understanding the COVID variants. What they're trying to do with genomic surveillance is say, okay, if you're getting swabbed for COVID and you have COVID, we're going to keep that. Not everyone's swab who gets sequenced, right? They're going to keep that sequence, keep that swab. They're going to get it sequenced, and they're going to see what version of COVID do you have, right? Which variant do you have? Do you have the original COVID? Do you have one of the new variants? That sort of thing. And this is called genomic surveillance. They do it for the flu, chikungunya, Ebola, measles. They've been doing it for COVID all year, and their entire team, if you go to this page and you scroll down to the bottom, they all have their Twitter accounts and their social media accounts, and they talk. So one of the leaders here is Trevor Bedford. He gets on Twitter and he does like these huge explanations of, here's my interpretation of what's going on with COVID right now. And then he'll have other scientists answer him back and be like, I think you're wrong on this point. I mean, it's a whole scientific discussion that's happening online, and you get to observe it. And it's super cool, as long as you can handle the mental, sometimes strain that Twitter brings to our lives. So that's just another resource you could work in. This is more of a nonprofit situation. There's also Sage Bio in Seattle. So the thing with industry and nonprofits is that a lot of those jobs will be on the coasts or in major cities in the Midwest. If you want to get a job in bioinformatics in Omaha, for example, you're going to be in academia. To be frank, at this time, we're trying to grow our biotech capacity here, but that's still where it is. You can also go work for, so any of these companies that you may recognize, these are all your medical record producers. They all do clinical informatics, health informatics. How do I use my health data to improve patient outcomes? How do I say, okay, I think all of my patients who go into this surgery with XYZ predisposition come out a lot better than people without it. You can use health informatics or biomedical informatics for that. We do have bioinformaticians who are employed by our medical center who also do analysis of patient genomes for, if there's a fertility issue, if there's cancer, genetic counseling, there's also roles there as well. So that would be in a hospital setting. The final one is kind of off the beaten path, but if anyone's ever thought about being, I really want to be in policy here. I want to be setting public health policy, or I don't like the way, my state handled COVID restrictions or whatever. So there's a huge role or space for people who are involved in policy. And for bioinformatics, people who are involved in policymaking there need an understanding of computer science. So this is just an example of the NHGRIs. They have a whole team, really well-developed data sharing policy. Okay, so we're getting a little specific here, but to give you the broad context, so the National Institutes of Health is led by Francis Collins, who is the director. I think I've got his picture. There it is. Pardon me. Within the National Institutes of Health, there are 27 institutes, and one of those is led by Eric Green. He leads the National Human Genome Research Institute here. You'll probably also see here the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Disease, which I think everyone knows by now. The lead of that, the NIAID, is Dr. Fauci. So Eric Green is also, this is Eric Green here. He's also on Twitter, very active on Twitter. If you've ever done the strawberry DNA video, there's a extracting DNA from a strawberry video, and it's a dude with glasses, and it's another chick with glasses. He's the dude in that video. So if you can Google that, it's a 10-minute video. Fun person to watch. So that is, they have a whole area on data sharing policy. So they need people to sit around and talk about how do people use our data, right? And they need to understand what a genome is. How should we share expectations with people who choose to share their genome data, right? What should we do with 23andMe, right? Should they be allowed to collect that data? All these sorts of things. So there's also jobs for people who are interested in policy. So if you've got if you thought you might want to go to law school, this may be a good space for you. So that's kind of my overview here. I think I covered everything. You'll have to let me know, Dr. Bonham-Carter, if I didn't, but these are my contacts. You're best suited finding me either via email or on the Twitter machine, or if you just want to find people to follow, you can check out my followers or people I follow list. Are there any questions, comments, concerns, disagreements, anything? Thank you for your attention.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Dr. Cooper, for coming and giving us all this information. This is much more information than I ever could have. I think it's been absolutely fantastic. I wish that when I was a bioinformatics student starting out, that there was someone like you to actually explain some of these things to me way back then, though, because it would have made everything so much easier. But I'm very, very glad to see that there are all these different professional groups out there, which actually do, I mean, they do provide a lot of, like, I guess, assistance in finding careers and kind of like figuring out where you're going. I think that maybe some of our questions in careers are that we are standing in front of so many things that are going on, and it's hard to know, when I finish these studies now, what will be the hot thing to be doing in, say, 4 years or 5 years. So I guess the big question I wanted to ask you about that is, how do you gauge that? How do you kind of, what kind of feeling, I guess, do you use, or what is your intuition on, like, where the new and up and coming areas will be in 4 years, so that when you do graduate with your master's or PhD, you'll be ready?
That's a great question. I try to tell people to specialize, find something you like early, read the literature. So we like to recommend that our students read the first year, just read, and you know this, of course, but read, just try to understand the field and where it's going. I think that, so traditionally in an academic environment, the way that you figured out what the up and coming trends were going to conferences, but we know now that that's not always accessible for people with little children, people who are non-traditional student, people who don't have funding. They can't always go to those conferences because it's like thousands of dollars to go. Sometimes your PI doesn't have money to send you. So now the virtual conferences and the academic Twitter and all of these online forums, there's biostars.org. There's Stack Overflow. There's a whole bioinformatics sub on Stack Overflow. Really engaging these communities. And I never thought I'd hear myself saying these things, but talking to other people in the field will give you a sense of what is up and coming, where things are going. I think that's the best way to do it. And the other thing I tell students, is you have to specialize in one area, especially for the graduate work. Something I struggled with in my doctoral research was trying to do everything. And I don't think that served me very well. My dissertation was very long, and I don't think that's a good thing. I don't think that's a good thing at all. So the advice I would give is to specialize. A lot of these areas of research are not going away, even if it's going to be, if it's boring in 4 years, right? So what's the one that I always talk about? So data mining is super hot. Machine learning is super hot right now. It may not enjoy the sustained hotness that it has right now, but it will always be around. I mean, machine learning's been around since like the 70s, right? You all might know better than I do, but it will not go away. And like me, I've actually transitioned right from bioinformatics and network analysis to diet, microbiome, and consumer health informatics. So that is something that's always something you can do as well. So I would worry less about being forward thinking. I would worry more about knowing the literature, knowing the major players, and then keeping track of what they're talking about to make sure you have an idea of where it's going and what the gaps are. Because that's really what we're trying to do, is contribute to science, right? And move the field forward.
Okay, are there any questions for our speaker?
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. And you can always email me. I'm very accessible. I
Yeah,
got 3 kids, so I'm always up in the middle of the night.
maybe we'll do that. Actually, maybe we'll do that. If there are any questions, I think that maybe people are still processing things.
Yes.
But if there are any questions, then you can expect a flux of emails coming through with all kinds of really witty remarks and typical Allegheny College types of questions, which really kind of get to the meat of the matter and uncover and break this thing wide open. It's like that kind of thinking here. But Dr. Cooper, thank you so much for coming to be part of our class today. You can always come back and join us whenever you want. It's great having you. It's also great to see you. I haven't seen you in like years. I think the last time I was in Omaha was probably in, 2 years ago. And I remember we had, I was like actually sit around and listen to some of the talks and of the new doctoral students who are there, and they all sound so exciting. And so it's really amazing to hear how your department's coming along. I think that it's a walk through memory lane. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yes. I think maybe I'll draw a class here then. But but for my class though, if there's any questions, please let me know. Obviously, please send those emails to Dr. Cooper. Also, I have sent out a questionnaire, which I'm hoping that everyone here is able to fill out and then return to me as soon as you possibly can. And that is your attendance credit for today. Dr. Cooper, thank you so much for being here. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Good to see you. Have a great rest of your day, everyone.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.